From the memories of a soldier, I stood knee-deep in the icy mud, clutching the rifle with numb fingers. There are endless fir trees all around, shrouded in fog and gunpowder smoke. Somewhere ahead, a few meters away, a German sniper could be sitting. Or the mine was waiting under the fallen leaves. Or an artillery observer has already aimed at our position. In the morning, there were 160 of us in the company. By evening, there are 16 left. The rest lay in the forest, torn to pieces, crushed by trees, burned in tanks. Some simply disappeared, as if the forest had swallowed them alive. It was Hurtgen, a cursed forest on the German border that had to be traversed in 3 days. But the American soldiers were stuck there for 3 months. 33,000 Americans will die there. After the triumphant liberation of France in the summer of 1944, American troops were full of optimism. The soldiers and officers sincerely believed that the war would end by Christmas. Germany seemed doomed, its armies were retreating, and the Allies were steadily advancing towards the borders of the Third Reich. However, the reality turned out to be much more severe. Approaching the legendary Siegfried Line, a powerful system of fortifications on the western border of Germany, Anglo-American forces encountered fierce resistance. The Wehrmacht, which many have already written off, has shown that it is capable not only of defending itself, but also of delivering sensitive counterattacks. Stretched Allied communications led to a serious supply crisis in mid-September. Tanks stopped running out of fuel, artillery was short of shells, and soldiers were suffering from a shortage of winter uniforms. It was at this critical moment that the Hürtgen Forest, a huge forest area of about 140 square kilometers by European standards, stood in the way of American troops under the command of General Omar Bradley. This ancient forest, located on the border of Belgium and Germany, was supposed to be a passing episode in the offensive on the Rhine. Instead, it turned into a bloody trap that swallowed up entire divisions. An ideal field for defense. For the German command, the Hürtgen Forest has become a real gift of fate. Dense thickets, hilly terrain, narrow forest roads, all this made it impossible to effectively use American trump cards, superiority in tanks and aircraft. Field Marshal Walter Model, one of the Wehrmacht's best defensive strategists, was well aware of the value of this area. The Germans turned the forest into an insurmountable fortress. Thousands of mines were laid on all approaches and trails. Machine gun nests were located in concrete pillboxes and bunkers built before the war as part of the western rampart. But the main weapon of the defenders was artillery. By controlling the heights, the German observers had an excellent view of the entire area. Artillery spotters with surgical precision aimed fire at numerous batteries located on the western bank of the Ruhr River. The American command assigned the troops the task of trapping the German forces in the forest so that they could not be transferred to the north, where the Allies were trying with great difficulty to break through the Siegfried Line. In addition, there was a direct route through the forest to the strategically important dams on the Ruhr River. By opening the floodgates, the Germans could flood the valley and stop any offensive, while preserving their reserves. These considerations seemed valid on the maps at headquarters, but the reality turned out to be completely different. The beginning of the disaster. The 3rd Armored Division of the U.S. Army was the first to enter the Green Hell. Already in the first days of September, it became clear that the forest was no place for tank units. The vehicles sank into the mud on narrow forest roads, becoming easy targets for German anti-tank guns. Dozens of Shermans were blown up by mines or burned by precise hits. The crews, accustomed to maneuver warfare on the plains of France, were helpless in the wilds of the forest. The exhausted tankers were replaced by units of the 9th Infantry Division. But the Marines also faced hell, which they were not prepared for. In the dense forest, visibility did not exceed several tens of meters. German snipers, who knew the area perfectly, methodically knocked out officers and sergeants. Mortar shells, bursting in the treetops, rained down a deadly rain of splinters and fragments of wood on the Americans. By mid-October, the 9th Division had advanced only 3 kilometers, while losing 4,500 men killed, wounded and missing. It was a terrible loss for such a modest result. In some companies, up to 80% of the personnel have left. But the American command stubbornly drove all new units into the meat grinder. The main mistake of Major General Leonard Giraud, who commanded the 5th Corps, was a vicious tactic. Instead of concentrating significant forces in one direction and breaking the enemy's resistance with a powerful blow, the Americans engaged the divisions in turn. As soon as one unit bled to death and was withdrawn to the rear, a fresh division was thrown in its place, which repeated the fate of its predecessors. This tactic piecemeal played into the hands of the Germans. They managed to regroup, pull up reserves, and restore destroyed positions. The Wehrmacht took full advantage of the defense in the wooded area, turning every meter of the forest into a death trap. On November 2, 1944, the 28th Infantry Division under the command of General Norman Cott entered the battle. This ambitious officer was determined to succeed where his predecessors had failed. The target of the offensive was the village of Schmidt in the depths of the forest, a key point of the German defense. But the 28th Division's offensive turned into a disaster. At first, the advanced units were hit by bombs from their own aircraft, a tragic mistake caused by poor coordination and the difficulty of determining positions in a dense forest. Then, after 2 days of bloody fighting, the Americans finally managed to occupy Schmidt. But they couldn't hold the village. The German counterattack was devastating. The Wehrmacht tanks, operating in familiar terrain, broke through the defenses of the exhausted Americans. A disorderly retreat began, which turned into a stampede. The soldiers threw down their weapons and equipment, trying to escape into the forest thicket. In a few days, the 28th Division lost half of its personnel, more than 6,000 people. The angry General Cott needed a scapegoat. He became Private Eddie Slovik, the only American soldier shot during World War II for desertion. His execution was supposed to serve as an example for others, but it could not hide the failure of his command. The human cost of stubbornness. In November, the 4th Infantry Division was thrown into the forest meat grinder. History repeated itself with frightening precision. From November 7th to December 3rd, the division lost over 7,000 men. One of the company commanders, Lieutenant Wilson, bitterly reported to headquarters, "We started with a full company of 162 people. Now there are 16 of us left, including me." Among the thousands of Americans who went through the hell of the Hürtgen Forest was the future writer Jerome Salinger. While serving in the 12th Infantry Division, he witnessed the deaths of 2,500 of his comrades. The horrors he experienced deeply influenced his subsequent work, leaving an indelible mark on the writer's soul. The bloodless parts were replaced by new ones. The elite 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red Unit, the pride of the American Army, joined the battle. But even these seasoned veterans were unable to turn the tide of the battle. The forest swallowed people up. On November 16th, the American command launched Operation Queen, a large-scale offensive aimed at breaking through to the Ruhr River. 4 divisions of Major General Joseph Collins' 7th Corps were to break the German defenses. The offensive was preceded by heavy artillery training and massive bombing. But the Germans were ready. Hiding in deep bunkers and dugouts, they waited out the barrage and then met the attackers with dense fire. The American infantry, deprived of the support of tanks and aircraft in the forest, suffered terrible losses. Particularly fierce fighting took place over Hill 400, known as Castle Hill. From this commanding height, there was a view of the entire area. The Germans turned it into an impregnable fortress, bristling with pillboxes and entangled with barbed wire. Elite units were brought in to storm the heights, the 2nd Ranger Battalion, which became famous during the Normandy landings. These elite fighters have managed to accomplish the impossible. With the support of heavy artillery, including 155mm howitzers, they captured the summit. Bulldozers made from Sherman tanks filled up the German trenches and made their way through obstacles. But the victory came at a terrible price. By the end of the day, only 25 of the 2 Ranger assault companies remained in the ranks. The rest were killed or seriously injured. And even this victory turned out to be temporary. 9 days later, the Germans recaptured the height during a fierce counterattack. The fighting in the Hürtgen Forest took on the character of a positional war, reminiscent of the worst battles of the First World War. The famous war correspondent Ernest Hemingway, who visited this sector of the front, called what was happening Passchendaele with trees, comparing it to one of the bloodiest battles of 1917. Progress was measured in meters, and sometimes centimeters. Soldiers spent weeks sitting in waterlogged trenches, suffering from cold, dampness, and disease. Trench foot, pneumonia, and nervous breakdowns mowed down people no worse than German bullets. Evacuation of the wounded in the dense forest was extremely difficult. Many died without waiting for help. The German forces defending the Siegfried Line were led by experienced commanders from the Eastern Front. They knew perfectly well how to conduct defensive battles in difficult conditions and skillfully used every fold of the terrain. While the Americans huddled in hastily dug trenches, the Germans took refuge in warm dugouts and concrete shelters. By the middle of December 1944, the battle for the Hürtgen Forest had actually ended. The Americans were never able to capture the entire forest area and reach the Ruhr River in the designated area. The 3-month fighting cost the Allies more than 33,000 people killed, wounded and missing. German losses amounted to about 28,000 people, also a huge figure, but the defenders achieved the goal by stopping the offensive. A new breakthrough attempt began only in February 1945, after the failure of the German offensive in the Ardennes. By this time, the Wehrmacht's forces were completely exhausted. Demoralized German soldiers began to surrender en masse, realizing the futility of further resistance. On February 10, units of the 1st American Army finally took control of the dams on the Ruhr River. But the Germans managed to open the floodgates, flooding the valley. Due to the flooding, a full-fledged offensive towards the Rhine began only on the 20th of February, with a delay of several months. Estimates of historians. Decades later, American military historians give an extremely critical assessment of the actions of Generals Bradley and Hodges. Instead of outflanking the forest or blocking it with small forces, the American command stubbornly tried to break through the mine jungle directly. This frontal tactic deprived the U.S. Army of all its advantages, superiority in technology and aviation. Lieutenant Ulmberg, a participant in the fighting, recalled, "Some of us, who had combat experience from the beaches of Normandy, hardly understood the need for these sacrifices. Why storm an impregnable fortress head-on when you can just bypass it?" The Battle of the Hürtgen Forest remains the longest-running battle in the history of the American Army. But she found herself overshadowed by other operations: the Normandy landings, the Ardennes offensive, and the crossing of the Rhine. It is rarely remembered on Veterans Day, and it is not studied in military academies as an example of brilliant strategy. Among the few attempts to comprehend this tragedy in art, the 1988 film When the Fanfare Stops, directed by John Owen, stands out. This is one of the rare American war films where the war is shown without Hollywood pathos and heroization, as a dirty, cruel and often senseless massacre.